Wasted money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deeper seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. But time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Okay, welcome to the 7th of our Easter revision series. Great to see everybody piling into the live chat as we speak. We've been chatting about football, everything and everything in the last few minutes. So please hit the subscribe button if you want to contribute to the live chat. And we'll try to post up, as we often do, some of the best answers to the many questions that we've got in this session on labour markets. Just before we kick off, quick reminder that the tour wagon is heading to Portsmouth, Bristol, Birmingham, London, and beyond in the weeks to come. At Portsmouth on Monday, and then Bristol and Birmingham, and then some dates in London to kick off the live events. Always great to see people if you can join us live. Here we go. Let's look at labour market economics, and we've got a nice new activity for you to kick off today. It's called the high or low activity. Here it comes up on the screen. Now, in this situation, I asked the question: is the next figure lower or higher expressed as a percentage? So the UK unemployment rate is currently, youth employment is currently 11%. So is the next figure higher or lower than 11%? And the data we're looking for is, we're looking for the migrant workers as a percentage of the labour force. So migrant workers as a percentage of the labour force, is it higher or lower than 11%? What do we think? And put the answers in chat. And in particular, if you think it's lower or higher, give me an estimate for your percentage. What do we think? So Owen thinks it's higher. Julie thinks it's higher. A couple of people think it's lower. So as a percentage of the labour force, what is migrant workers in the UK as a percentage? Is it higher or lower than 11%? What do we think? Rosetta thinks it's really high, 34%. Freya thinks it's a bit lower. What do we got here? A couple more answers. Henry thinks it's 15%. And Kelly thinks it's 34%. Here it comes up on the screen for you. This is a good application, by the way. It's actually 18%. So as of 2022, according to the ONS data, migrant workers account for about just under 1 in 5 of the labour force. Quite a high figure. Now, the next one. Given that figure, what about percentage of workers in the UK paid at or below the minimum wage? So what percentage of people are paid at the minimum wage? Of course, just gone up by 9%, or below it. Now, you can be paid below the minimum wage. It's illegal, but that raises questions of enforcement. So most people saying lower. Actually, there's a mixture of opinion here. Henry thinks it's 8%. Rob Gabriel says it's got to be lower. Gabby thinks it's higher. Joe thinks it's lower. And Clyde thinks it's lower. Here comes the answer. It is indeed 5%. Now, that is an interesting bit of application for your exams because there are about 5% of workers paid at the minimum wage or a little bit below. Hopefully not many paid below it. Minimum wage has gone up a lot in the last few years. So it doesn't really affect the majority of workers, does it? So if you get a question of minimum wage, there's the evaluation. About 1 worker in 20 is paid at or below the minimum wage. So a significant increase doesn't necessarily have a major effect on the labour market as a whole. Now, the next one is the percentage of people in work in the UK earning more than £30,000 a year. So what do we reckon? Robbie says, I get paid a minimum wage. Well done, Robbie, working and studying at the same time. So what do we think here? Higher or lower than 5%? What percentage of people in the UK in work earn more than £30,000 a year? That's the wage plus the overtime plus other earnings. Well, most people saying higher. Barnaby and Finn and Eva are saying higher. Quite a few people saying it's 25%. Klaus thinks it's 45%. Charles thinks it's 56%. Here's the answer coming up for you. It is higher. It's 28%. So that's quite interesting. Quite high. Now the last one. Now this is a really interesting question. What percentage of people in work in the UK are members of a trade union? So trade unions could easily come up as part of labour market economics, the roles of unions, the impact of unions, the arguments for and against them. What do we reckon here? George thinks it's a bit lower. Loads of answers coming in. Thanks for posting in the chat window. I'll try and keep up. Joe thinks it's lower. A couple of suggestions. Matt thinks it's 45%, but Ollie thinks it's 15%. Isaac thinks it's 22%. Matt thinks it's 15%. People asking me, am I a member of a union? The answer is no, I'm not. Freya and Kelly both around the sort of 14-15% mark. Okay, this is for 2022, by the way. So obviously there's been a wave of strikes recently affecting certain industries, in particular public sector jobs. The answer is coming up on the screen, and the answer is lower. So again, 23%. Well done for those of you who got very close. That figure's come down. In 1979, when Thatcher was elected as Prime Minister, the figure was 55%. It's now less than a quarter. Again, if you get a question on trade unions, there's your evaluation application, everybody. Less than 1 worker in 4 in the UK is a member of a trade union. Indeed, in sectors such as farming, retail, hospitality, travel and tourism, the figure is much lower, below 10%. And as Alex Howard points out, superb bit of application there from Alex, it's much higher in the public sector. Indeed it is, particularly when it comes to transport and public services. Okay, well done. Let's test you on some multiple choice questions, as always. If you get a chance, please post the answer in the chat window. These are all past paper questions, by the way. Wages in industry X are significantly higher than in industry Y. So what might explain this difference? Take a moment to have a go at question 1. And if you want to, post the answer in the chat window. Those of you watching on replay, and hundreds, thousands watch on replay, just press the pause button, take a moment to think of your own answer, and then we'll go through it together. Some good answers coming through. A lot of people saying D. Well, of course, yeah, industry X has higher wages than industry Y. That's the key thing, isn't it? A lot of people saying D. Ollie and Tom, Owen, Clyde and Jack. Here's the answer coming up. The answer is indeed D. Yes, if industry Y has non-monetary advantages, typically that causes more people to work in that sector independent of the wage, vocational drive, terms and conditions, holiday length, etc. And if more people then work in industry Y, in theory, that makes wages relatively lower in Y. X becomes relatively higher. Question number 2 coming up on the screen. Good question. The chart gives information about the average daily wage in all industries in India, rupees per day. What could have caused this trend in wages in India? What do we think for this one? Arhan makes a good point as we're going through this. Non-monetary benefits may enter the industry due to job satisfaction. And Oscar makes the point about pecuniary. Pecuniary just means the monetary benefits from working. Okay, so answers coming through. Most people are saying D. Let's check the answer on the screen. Indeed, it's D. Now, not every board asks you to understand marginal revenue product, but for those people who use MRP theory, it's the price of the output multiplied by the output of the extra worker. So presumably if productivity is going up in India, that should cause wages to rise on average. And that's things like economies of scale and foreign direct investment and increased capital spending within the economy. Question number 3 coming up. Nice question here. Diagram shows percentage of those on low pay and extremely low pay in the country from 1976 to 2012. Minimum wage reduced in 1999. I wonder which country that might have been. What conclusion is consistent with the diagram? So this might take a little longer. What do we think here? So you have 2 data lines there. Low paid as a percentage of the labour force, extremely low paid as a percentage of the labour force. The minimum wage kicked in 1999. And what is consistent with the diagram? A lot of people saying A, which is incorrect. It's the percentage of people on low pay and on extremely low pay. So it's not A. To give you a clue for this one, you can't deduce that from the data. Okay, and now a lot of people are saying C or B. Let's check the answer. It's not B, it is C. I'll explain why it's not B. The B, this is percentage of labour force. So you can't tell the numbers of low paid and extremely low paid because the labour force would have changed its size, won't it, between 76 and 2012. What happened was the minimum wage reversed a trend towards increased relative poverty, working poverty. And both data lines fell. Extremely low paid fell by more. That's what the minimum wage is designed to do. So, and of course, this was the UK. This was indeed the UK from 1999 onwards. I remember teaching the minimum wage. I mean, I've been teaching for 37 years now, 38 years. And minimum wage came in 1999. It was introduced by Blair, elected in 97, of course. And ever since then, there's been a huge debate about the level of the minimum wage in the UK, relative and real. But there's not much debate about whether we should have one. That debate seems to have been settled in politics. Here's the next question coming up, question 4. Now, this is a hard question. If you get this right, hats off to you. Diagram shows demand for and supply of labour in the construction sector. Okay, labour market initially in equilibrium at wage W1 and quantity of labour Q1. A union wishes to increase the wage, but not to decrease employment. So they want to drive the wage up to W2, but not to reduce employment. The employers offer wage W3. The question, which is right at the bottom of that diagram there, what will be the best policy to enable the union to achieve both aims? Higher wages, but without loss of employment. George saying that Blair hated the minimum wage. That's not true, George, if you read Steve Richards' great book on Prime Ministers. But of course, George, you might have been there at the time. Casper says A. Alex says D. Quite a few answers coming through. Buda says D. And the Riddler. Welcome to the Riddler, who comes to all of our sessions. One of the great... Riddler must have now filled his loyalty card. Here's the answer coming up on the screen. The answer is D, yes. What you have to visualize shifting out the demand for labor to point E. And of course, if you can raise marginal productivity, employers will be able to pay workers more, and employment could also rise at the same time. So you should visualize a shift in labor demand. That was a tough question. Here's question 5, our last question. Now, again, this is a really good one. The government is worried about the increasing monopsony power of employers. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Which policy combination is most likely to improve wages and employment for workers? Now, there are 3 policies. One is trade union powers. In other words, strengthen or weaken them, their relative bargaining power. Immigration controls and the national minimum wage. What do we think is most likely to improve the relative wages and employment prospects of workers, given the monopsony power? Loads of answers flying in. So many people coming to all of our sessions, which is amazing. Welcome, by the way, if you're new today. Press the hit the subscribe button if you want to contribute your answer. You don't have to, but it's always great to have new people contributing. Here's the answer coming up. The answer is indeed B. Well done. The vast majority of people, including Will and Gabby and Owen and Harris, got that right. Strengthening the powers, of course, that's a counterbalance, countervailing power to monopsony. Strengthen immigration controls to limit labour supply and raise the minimum wage. Well done, everybody, on that one. Superb questions. There's some quite challenging questions there. Okay, moving on. Let's look at... Now, there's been a lot of questions in recent exams about labour supply. So I thought I'd just tweak our little challenge for you here and think about labour demand. So let's take an industry, construction. Give me 3 factors that might influence demand for labour in an industry such as construction. Have a go, please. Okay, some good answers coming through. A lot of you talking about derived demand. Here's Rob's answer. Rob's one of our regular contributors. The ability to substitute labour for capital. Yes, we'll come to that in a second, Rob. Skills in construction and the price of buildings. Yes, the retail price of the housing. Really good. Here's Robbie's answer. The demand for construction projects. The price of construction projects goes up. Going up attracts new demand for labour. Yes, so you get a rise in new builds, construction and housing. And Jasper Brown, mobility of labour, substitutes and demand for housing. By the way, during the pre-session chat, lots of people talking about completing every past paper, every past question. We have a whole series of exam shorts which might be worth downloading from the Tutor2 store. They're really good for extra questions. Hopefully these sessions are useful to you in terms of giving you a little different exam preparation slant. Yeah, so the key things affecting labour demand. First of all, the price of the good or service. So the higher the price of the final product, a new house, for example, the more profitable it is for businesses to produce it. So you can link that quite neatly to growth in the economy. Construction employment is both seasonal, but also cyclical, very cyclical employment sector. Productivity of labour, so the relative productivity of bricklayers compared to robots, for example. And critically, and quite a few of you mentioned this in the chat, which is fabulous, the cost of substitutes and the availability of substitutes. So, for example, can we replace workers? Traditionally, construction is a labour-intensive industry. Can we replace it with robotics? 3D manufacturing can now make houses, print houses. It's quite an interesting idea. Superb on that. Well done. Here's a linked question, a 60-second challenge for you. Can you spend a minute? No, actually, I'll give you 60 seconds instead of a minute. Full 60 seconds. Explain how robotics, AI, might impact on demand for labour in occupations of your choice. Let's see what you can come up with in a minute. A minute isn't long, but some great answers, and thank you for those. What I'd like to focus on here is a lot of people talking about the impact on demand for workers in general. If you make it more specific, you get the application marks. You don't need the data, you just need to have a relevant example. I think one or two might have come in. Leo talked about decreased demand for labour in supermarkets, which is a nice answer. Let's put it on the screen. There it is. That's Leo's answer. Decreased demand for labour in supermarkets, automation, obviously, things like robotics used by Ocado and other companies. However, increases demand in technology firms, potential cause of structural unemployment. The best answers, by the way, always try to use an example. His answer in the manufacturing industry, such as car making, where industries are moving towards capital-intensive production, demand for labour will decrease. That gives you, that little bit of such as seasoning gives you the application. So if you write generic answers, you'll get some marks, but not many, okay? Here's George's question. Geoff, will a question ever mandate an industry to talk about, or would you suggest swatting up? With EdXL, they'll ask you to talk about an industry of your choice, or a labour market of your choice, or an occupation of your choice. So it is worth swatting up on some industries and some jobs and some occupations. Next week, for example, I'll be doing some industry profile videos on YouTube, taking 4 or 5 industries that might be of interest. Lovely point here from Ollie Sherwin. New McDonald's branch in Texas, fully automated, launched this week. Wow. Bergonomics there from Ollie. Here is my answer. These technologies have the potential to replace human workers in a variety of occupations. For example, robots can perform welding, surgery. Wow. AI being used to develop self-driving cars and trucks can reduce the need for human drivers. You see what we're trying to do there? It's not a perfect answer, but we're trying to add in a little bit of such as seasoning to get the application marks. Last year in the exams, 40% of all the application marks were not awarded by the examiners. Students were writing theoretical answers, but weren't adding in the such as seasoning. Here's a slightly different one. A lot of people talk about job losses. In 30 seconds, can you give me a positive effect on labour demand of technologies such as AI? Over to you. And again, thank you for some answers there. Oscar's answer is interesting. Can improve the productivity of workers if used in unison, boosting MRP and thus demand? Nice answer. What I would suggest there is that the question, you have to read the question carefully, everybody. Positive effect on labour demand of technologies. So a lot of people are talking about the positive effects on businesses of technologies. So you just got to try and link it to labour demand, the demand for certain types of jobs. There's a great book called The World of Work by Dan Suskind, where he talks about whether AI, automation, robotics are substitutes for labour or complements for labour. So here's Henry Marwood's answer. The development of AI will create the need for highly skilled workers who know how to work and change the AI to work in certain firms. That's a great answer, Henry. Thank you for that. That's getting us closer to the application that we need. And here's my suggestions. Keep an eye on the chat window, folks, for some great answers. Yeah, so the derived demand. So you can make a case for saying that AI will have complementary effects on labor demand. It's going to create new jobs for software engineers, for programmers, for technicians, for robotic developers and manufacturers and installers and maintenance businesses. A lot of people are getting quite excited by how AI might benefit smaller businesses, particularly if they have access to cheap technologies, GPT-4, for example, and others. And critically, AI will create new markets, new industries that probably don't exist at the moment. Health tourism, medical treatments, life sciences, new forms of digital entertainment, for example. So there's lots of potential there for AI in a positive sense. The question I would ask in the chat window is, will AI replace tutor to you? Will we still need Jim and Graham and Geoff in the years to come? Because if you don't need us anymore, let us know in the chat window. Great answers there. So we've had two questions on labour demand. Let's little change focus here. Another key topic which exam boards are interested in, which is executive pay. Here's the data for 2022, everybody. 4.15 million median pay for FTSE 100 chief executives. You know the mean will be higher than the median. Many executives benefit from increasing the stock market and things. Here's my question. We'll do two questions together. Coming up, can you give me 3 arguments in support of a legal cap, maximum cap on executive pay in the UK labour market? What can you come up with? Be fascinating. Tobias, distribution of income decreases the gap on the Lance curve. I think Zoe had a really good point about the principal agent problem. Can we maybe put that up on the screen? It might be coming up. So, yeah, here it comes. Yeah, redistribution of money to where it's needed more. Interesting. Inequality and also the principal agent problem. So oftentimes shareholders in businesses don't really have much knowledge about how much CEOs are getting paid or executives are getting paid. And it is an agency issue. Loads of really good points. What have we got here? I think George had a great point. George Baldock, who is one of our top contributors. Everybody's contributions are always welcome, but George is on fire at the moment. And here it comes up. Here we go. Yeah, is there an argument it reaches inefficiency that arises from intra-firm competition as managers try to one-up each other to get a bigger bonus? There's almost like what George is hinting at there is like an arms race in businesses. Other executives look at other executives' pay, and that kind of leads to what's called the ratchet effect. It drives up executive pay as a whole, perhaps well above any kind of fair, equitable value. That is what I love about the argument from George there is there's a nuance to his evaluation, which is a star standard in truth. Here are my points. Oh, Bruno comes in. Could lead to companies focusing more on nurturing upcoming talent instead of seeking the best from other countries. That is a really good evaluation point. So instead of, there's a global battle for talented people, clearly in every industry, maybe businesses would be looking to a point from within rather than just going out looking to get the best players. Very similar to Harrogate Town in the EFL too. Here are 3 points. Again, if you want to add to your notes, just take a screenshot or press the pause button if you're watching on replay. I think the key issue is one of equity, one of fairness. So it's a relative compensation for executives compared to the workshop grassroots infantry in businesses. So a lot of people on minimum wage or above or below median pay are really struggling with the cost of living crisis. And if CEO pay is rising to such high levels, is that really fair? You can link it also to corporate culture, the extent to which this drives unethical behavior, particularly if you give people share options. And generally, there's an argument saying that a pay cap might just take away some of the steam out of the bonus culture, which often leads to very short-term thinking, drive the corporate bonus in a given year instead of long-term business aims. But great answers. Evaluate. Here we go. Here's another one. Can we think about, I'm sure you're going to pile in on this one, arguments against a cap in the UK on executive pay. Have a go. So Matt talking about trickle-down economics, arguing that CEOs and CFOs and things, executives are often geographically mobile, so they'll tend to move to countries without pay caps or where taxes are lower. Kate talks about it might lead to skilled workers leaving the country, a brain drain, loss of sort of human capital in the executive part of the labour market. Harris talks about division of ownership and control gets worse if executives feel they have less skin in the game. The answers here, which talk about the agency problem, ownership and control, stakeholders, different stakeholders, these are really, really top answers. Here are my thoughts on this question. Market forces, this could be government failure. You can make a case for saying a cap on executive pay might lead to government failure. It clashes with market forces. Companies should be free to pay whatever is necessary to get the best talent in a globalized world. A lot of companies now do link executive pay to measures of performance, long-term measures, including environmental sustainability. So in fact, companies are responding to the issue of executive pay. And a lot depends on the scrutiny that shareholders are willing to do on behalf of other workers. And the other issue is fiscal. Highly paid executives do pay 45% on incomes above 125k. So you can make a case for saying that executives are paid well, but they also pay a very high marginal rate of tax. They contribute heavily to the tax revenues. So well done on that. It was an interesting question, interesting issue. We've got two more issues to think about before we finish. Let's look at immobility of labour. Can you give me 3 causes, please, of geographical immobility in the UK labour market? In 30 seconds, it's hard to type great answers. Jack DM does a pretty good job, talks about differences in living costs and regional incomes and what have you. Alex talks about high regional differentials in house prices acting as a huge barrier and unaffordable renting. I will show you a chart in a minute, Alex, which confirms the point you're making. A lot of people talk about lack of infrastructure, particularly transport there, some good points. Jake talks about lack of infrastructure and also loyalty to the region that you might have grown up in, or perhaps the region you went to school or university in. So some good points coming up there. Geographic mobility is a major cause of structural unemployment in the UK. There's Jake's point. Lack of infrastructure, high house prices, and loyalty to location. Yeah, absolutely. Here are my points. Housing costs, undoubtedly. Moving to a new area can be super expensive. Rents are very high. I'll show you an amazing chart in a second. Median rent in London can take up to 60% of people's disposable incomes. It's nuts. Other living costs, the cost of commuting, the cost of childcare expenses, food prices might vary. The IFS reckon that the cost of just moving to a new area can be up to £10,000 for a family, which is a major cost. And Joseph Ramsey Foundation found that 1 in 5 unemployed people are only 1 in 5 willing to move to find work. Social ties, family ties can often be a significant non-monetary a barrier to movement. Excellent. By the way, if you're studying economics at university in the autumn after your gap year, please post in the chat window. We'd love to know, by the way, if you're studying an economics related subject, if you are, and also maybe where you're studying. It'd be fascinating to find out. Just Alex Howard's point about renting, I just wanted to show you this chart. Again, this is application for your exams, but this came up on the FT just a couple of days ago. There's Alex's point. High rent costs restrict the ability to save, leading to perpetual rent trap. I love the idea of the rent trap. People can't afford to buy and they can't afford to move. Look at that chart. In many parts of the UK, it is much cheaper to buy a house if you can get a mortgage than it is to rent. And rents have risen by 1/5 over the past 3 years. Okay, penultimate. Give me three. Can you give me 3 policies that might improve geographic mobility in the UK labour market? Have a go. Okay, so answers coming through. Kelly talks about investment on building houses to increase supply and reduce prices. Jay talks about Crossrail in London. I was on the Elizabeth line going from Slough to Stratford the other week. It was a fantastic service. The Riddler argues that we should nationalise rail. And Clyde talks about rent caps, relocation subsidies and infrastructure improvement. Now, the beauty about Clyde's answer there, which is terrific, is that it opens up good analysis, and you can imagine some diagrams there to build the answer, and lots of application potentially. So, for example, Sadiq Khan's potential cap on rents in London. Millie makes a really interesting point. Regional minimum wages. Wow, that's interesting. Rent controls, spending on infrastructure to add to her points there. Fantastic. Here are my arguments. I'm conscious of time here. Everybody's so busy. Yeah, interesting. Rent controls. So there are some cities where rent controls have happened. As you may have considered this in year 12, the economics of a maximum price in the rental market. Most economists don't favour rent controls. They might favour reforms to the rights of tenants, including a ban on no-fault evictions. Fundamentally, we've got to build more homes. So investment in new house building, minimum affordable homes, for example, and critically, things like infrastructure. Make it as specific as possible. HS2, yes, but it's 20 years away. Crossrail, yes, local lines. And a lot of local councils, by the way, have introduced £2 caps on bus fares, which might actually have a significant effect on local transport. Absolutely brilliant. Now, one more question to go before we have a little fun activity to end. People did ask, could I cover monopsony power? I won't show you the diagram in this session. We do have a separate video on monopsony and the diagram there. Have a 60-second challenge. Can you explain to us, please, what monopsony power is and why it might lead to labour market failure? Have a go. So we highlighted some of the great answers on the screen. And here's one, a really good one from Humphrey. Monopsony power can cause employers to control the price of labour due to being the sole employer, the sole buyer of labour. Therefore, wages could fall and cause incomes to fall and disposable income to fall in quality of life. Yeah, so nice chain of reasoning there. Monopsony power, of course, has become so popular as an exam question because we've got some dominant employers these days. Hernan talks about monopsony power means firms use their bargaining power to pay workers below their MRP as they are price setters. That is a terrific, clean, succinct, accurate definition. Brings a bit of MRP theory as well, which is really good. Here's my little attempt, my pathetic attempt at an answer in 60 seconds. Monopsonists use their market power, should have used buying power really, to lower wages below the competitive level, below MRP. This is because they know that workers have few other options as they're the only employer in the market. Now, what I should have done there is just add a bit of such as seasoning to give an example, like Tesco or Aldi or whatever it is, the NHS or whatever it is. Okay, superb. Now, crucially, here's a little final question. Can you give me 2 interventions that might offset or lower the monopsony power of employers in certain industries and jobs? Have a go, 30 seconds. Okay, Sam talks about an increase in minimum wage, an increase in trade union power, and George asked the question, are unions a counterbalancing power? The answer is yes, it's a countervailing institution. If you have a strong trade union against a strong employer, it's a question of relative bargaining power. And here's my answers, conscious of time here. Minimum wage laws, yes. So minimum wage is the obvious intervention. Of course, there is a diagram. You may have come across it in your course or revision, where you can show that a minimum wage set appropriately can actually increase employment and wages in a monopsony, which goes against the conventional wisdom. So it ensures that workers get paid a fair wage, even when there's monopsony power. And also things like regulations and laws. So allowing trade union representation. There are big debates in the United States about this at the moment, about union representation at Starbucks and McDonald's and Deliveroo and other businesses. Gangmasters, the government's brought in the new Gangmasters licensing authority, which gangmasters, things like businesses who employ seasonal workers in farming, food processing, and so on and so forth. Equal pay legislation could be used, and other forms of employment protection. Alfie says, is the monopsony diagram in Excel or just AQA? Great question, Alfie. The monopsony diagram is definitely in AQA. You can use it for Edexcel. You don't need it. I teach it to my students, and I hope they use it because it brings a high level of analysis and evaluation into play. Fantastic answer. Let's finish with a quick game. I'm going to take you on here with a high or low activity. So in 2022, teachers on average took home pay of $48,600. I'll leave it to you to decide whether that's too high or too low. It's not for me to say. So what do we reckon? Answers in the chat window, please. Dentists, is their average wage salary higher or lower than teachers? And have a stab at what the answer might be. What do we think? Most people coming in very quickly by saying higher. Kate and Kelly and Felix and Sam. Jim suggesting that this question on dentists is just filling in. Very nice. Here we go. We'll gloss over that one. And the answer is higher, I think. Yes, £92,700. Wow. Okay, so if dentists paid $92,000, what about nurses and midwives? Can you deliver a good answer to this one? Are nurses and midwives paid more or less than dentists? The answer is, oh, Jim, you've just gone through all the answers.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
It's okay, never mind. So I think the answer is lower. The answer is lower, 38,000. Jim was about to type a pun and a joke. By the way, the more likes we get on the presentation, the more jokes we get. Okay. Toby says that Jim is a muppet, and I think we can all agree on that. Nurses and midwives, £38,000. Just okay, 10,000 lower than teachers. Okay, £10,000 lower than teachers. Now Ben says I'm going to say the next is lower. Well, you don't know what it is yet, Ben, do you? So here it comes. Security guards. Security guards. Is it higher or lower? I can't complain, by the way, because I was the guy who pressed mute for the first 3 minutes of a session on balance of payments last week, and nobody thought the session was any worse for it. Security guards. It is going to be lower, by the way, but what do you reckon the figure is for security guards? I think Jim just pressed it. 26,500, says Rob. So what do we think? Most people saying about 26,500. Let's check the answer. The answer is, bizarrely enough, 26,500. Now, I don't think you know the answer to the next one. Let's play all. If this is all on this, okay? Quids in, everybody. If you compare the relative pay of security guards and hairdressers and barbers, a lot of people think that's a bit of a fringe occupation, hairdressing. I disagree, as you can tell. By the way, I've got my own hairdresser. It's called Marco, and he charges me £5 for a haircut, plus a £300 search fee. So what do we reckon? Hairdressers and barbers? Alex says lower. Who's saying higher? Tom says, mate, you don't have hair. Well, Tom, it doesn't take a genius to work that out, to be quite honest. Kate thinks higher. What do we think of hairdressers and barbers? If you think it's lower, how much lower? If you think it's higher, how much higher? Keep in mind, this is the average. There's a lot of very well-paid hairdressers, including my own, obviously. What do we think? This consensus seems to be higher. Am I getting that right? A lot of people think it's about £30,000. Jack says higher by a couple of grand. The normal one says the base salary is lower, but tips determine net income. Fantastic point. Ollie says football hairdressers take it up to 30k. I thought you were going to say 300k. Okay, here we go. The answer is it is marginally higher, 28,400. Of course, that's still below the median pay in the UK. Median pay is about 32,000 per year. So there we go, higher. Okay, Herman says most take cash, so you don't know. Very, very good. Excellent point, Herman. Okay, thanks everybody. Hope you found that session useful on labour markets. I tried to avoid lots of diagrams. I decided to focus more on application and evaluation this time. If you enjoyed the session, please give us a like. Partly this is a battle between economics and business. And yesterday we got 130 likes and business got 55, which is hilarious. So if you could please give it a like, that's super important. And it kicks in the YouTube algorithm, which is even more important. We have a session tomorrow on market structures and economic efficiency. We're going to go through some of the big market structures, monopoly, oligopoly, all that kind of stuff, game theory tomorrow. Friday is our big session on the UK economy. And I'm going to set the Tutor2 Collective a challenge. Can we get more than 500 people on the live stream? We get thousands watching it after the event, but we've got 300 odd now. But can we get to 500 on Friday? I'll be super happy if we did. So thanks for joining in. Keep the revising going, keep the past papers going. Most of all, stay happy, stay curious, and see you sometime soon.